The chill off the Atlantic was a damp, creeping entity, a lie layered on top of the postcard warmth of Lisbon's sun. It was a physical presence, a miasma that snaked through the Alfama district's labyrinthine alleys, clinging to the ancient stone and seeping into the marrow. It carried a complex bouquet of scents, a perfumer's nightmare, the briny, iodine tang of salt and drying fishing nets from the docks below, the sharp, acrid bite of diesel fumes from a chugging ferry on the Tagus estuary, and the faint, melancholic strains of a fado guitar from a hidden tavern. The music, a sound so full of saudade it felt like the city's own mournful heartbeat, spoke of secrets, of laundry lines strung between wrought iron balconies like coded messages, and the mournful, metallic groan of the yellow number 28 tram as it screeched around a tight corner on its ancient, polished rails. For Ari Ben Zion, however, the air in this city was thick with more than just sea fog. It was a miasma of ghosts and gasoline. He was folded into the driver's seat of a Fiat Panda, a vehicle so cramped and gutless it felt like a mechanical apology on four wheels. The car, a sterile rental in anonymous silver, had been secured with a ghost credit card linked to a Cayman Islands shell corporation that had ceased to exist the millisecond the transaction cleared. It was parked on a steep, cobbled lane 3 streets from the target's temporary residence, an incline so severe that Ari's left leg, braced against the clutch pedal for what felt like an eternity, had progressed from a dull ache to a thrumming, insistent pain. For the last 6 hours, his world had been defined by this cramped space, a cage of cheap, off-gassing plastic and thin, distorting glass. The scent of stale, bitter coffee from a stainless steel thermos was a constant companion, mingling with the faint, almost clinical smell of the RDX plastic explosive component he knew was nested deep within their primary device. A clean, chemical scent that reminded him of a dentist's office, a smell of sanitized, impending violence. Everything about their presence in this city was designed to be ephemeral, transient, untraceable. Everything except the outcome. Through the powerful, gyroscopically stabilized Fujinon TSX 1440 binoculars, the apartment building on Rua dos Remedios was a study in mundane evil. It was a typical Pombalane-style structure, its facade adorned with faded blue azulejo tiles, some cracked and missing like gaps in a rotting smile. 4th floor, 2nd window from the left. A flicker of movement, a silhouette passing behind the thin, yellowed lace curtains. That was him. Fadi Al-Hamza, known to the intelligence world as the Ghost. He was the architect of the Vienna Cafe bombing, a symphony of ball bearings and hexamine that had killed 47, turning a Sunday afternoon of coffee and pastries into a charnel house. He was the mastermind of the Istanbul ferry attack, a meticulously planned atrocity that had turned a commuter vessel into a floating inferno, trapping over 100 souls in fire and water. He was a man who had turned the chemistry of combustion into a dark art form, painting his manifestos in blood and fire across 2 continents. For 18 agonizing months, he had lived up to his nom de guerre, vanishing from every watch list, every informant's report, every satellite's prying gaze. 18 months of funerals and recriminations, of failed leads that evaporated into dead ends in Damascus, Tripoli, and Berlin. 18 months of Ari's mentor, Yossi, learning to navigate the world with the carbon fiber prosthetic that had replaced the leg Al-Hamza's handiwork had stolen from him in Vienna. Yossi, who had once run a half-marathon in under 90 minutes, now measured his life in the chafing of a socket and the phantom itch of a foot that was no longer there. The memory of visiting Yossi in the Hadassah hospital was seared into Ari's mind like a brand. the sterile smell of antiseptic fighting a losing battle against the coppery scent of blood, the quiet hum of life support machinery, the look of sheer, impotent fury in his mentor's eyes. A fury directed not at the bombers, but at his own betrayed flesh. That image was the fuel that had powered Ari through the long, fruitless nights of this hunt. Then, 6 weeks ago, a whisper. Not from a human source, which could be compromised or coerced, but a digital murmur in the chaotic symphony of the dark web. It was a boastful, layered encryption message to a fledgling cell in Brussels, a piece of digital hubris from a man who believed himself invisible. It was intercepted not by a sprawling NSA facility in Fort Meade, but by a small, unassuming listening post deep in the Negev desert. A cluster of drab buildings baking under a relentless sun. A place staffed by brilliant, pale youths from Unit 8200 who lived on caffeine, patriotic fervor, and the quiet thrill of the hunt. They were the code breakers, the digital ghosts who haunted the world's networks. The ghost was planning something new, something bigger, and he was orchestrating it from the tranquil, sun-drenched coast of Portugal. The mission, codenamed Operation Damocles, was not one of capture. The intelligence was ironclad on this point. The ghost would never be taken alive. He was a walking dead man's switch, a zealot who viewed interrogation not as a threat, but as a final stage for his bloody theater, a chance to mock his captors before meeting his 72 virgins. The order, delivered by the director of Mossad himself from the soundproofed confines of his 8th-floor office in Tel Aviv, a room of smoked glass and cold leather that overlooked the city but felt connected to nowhere on earth, had been unequivocal, stripped of all ambiguity. Erase him. Make it look like an accident if possible, an act of God if not. But erase him so completely that not even a shadow of a doubt remained. A voice, calm and feminine, crackled in Ari's custom-molded Sennheiser Pro earpiece. The device looked like a high-end hearing aid, but was, in fact, a sophisticated transceiver operating on a triple-encrypted, frequency-hopping UHF band between 420 and 450 megahertz. A spectrum chosen for its excellent penetration in dense urban environments like the stone and plaster maze of the Alfama. Maya here. He's on the move. North exit. Standard pattern, as predicted. Ari didn't respond verbally. He tapped a small pressure plate beside his knee twice. An affirmative click in the silent network that connected him, Maya, and the other 2 members of their Katsa team. His focus was absolute, his world shrinking to the view through the binoculars. He watched as the heavy carved oak door of the building swung open. Fadi al-Hamza stepped into the afternoon light. He was not the monster Ari had imagined in his darker moments. There were no horns, no sulphurous aura. He was disappointingly, infuriatingly average. Mid-40s, with the thinning hair of a man losing a quiet war against genetics, and a soft paunch straining the fabric of a cheap gray windbreaker. He could have been a mid-level accountant on a budget holiday. In his hand, he carried a small plastic bag of groceries. The banality of it was obscene. This man, who debated the optimal explosive-to-shrapnel ratio for maximizing civilian casualties, was buying milk and bread. Al-Hamza paused on the sidewalk, his head swiveling in a slow, practiced arc that was anything but casual. He wasn't just looking, he was scanning, deconstructing the scene. He was reading the rhythm of the street, the old woman sweeping her stoop with a twig broom, the kids kicking a worn football against a stone wall, the tourist couple arguing over a map, searching for a single dissonant note. He checked the reflections in the glass of a closed pasteleria, his gaze lingering for a full 3 seconds on a parked delivery van. Ari's breath caught in his throat. The van was clean. It belonged to a local bakery, verified by Maya's team an hour ago. But Al-Hamza's paranoia was a physical force, an invisible shield he wore as surely as his windbreaker. His heart rate is elevated, Maya's voice reported, a fraction tighter now, betraying the tension beneath her professional calm. 78 beats per minute, now 85. He's spooked. The information was being painted onto her screen by a long-range laser Doppler vibrometer, a piece of bleeding-edge technology borrowed from the aerospace division and positioned on a rooftop observation post 2 kilometers away. It was aimed at Al-Hamza's chest, its invisible, coherent light beam reading the microscopic vibrations of his pulse off the buttons of his jacket. The data stream was just one of 100 invisible threads they had woven around the ghost in his sun-drenched cage. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, Al-Hamza seemed to relax, his shoulders dropping a fraction. His internal alarm had been silenced. He turned left, his pace unhurried, heading for the entrance of the underground garage where he kept his car. A late-model silver Mercedes E-Class sedan, anonymous, reliable, and powerful enough to escape trouble. It was his cocoon, his mobile fortress. It was also, if their plan held, to be his coffin. Ari twisted the key. The Fiat's small engine whined in protest before catching. He slipped the car into gear, the shifter loose and imprecise, and pulled out into the light Lisbon traffic. He expertly placed a rattling tram and 2 passenger cars between himself and the garage entrance. He was the Overwatch, the quarterback, the first link in a chain of ghosts hunting a ghost. The plan had been conceived in a sterile, windowless room in Tel Aviv, a secure facility they called the Aquarium. It was a symphony of technical audacity and brutal, elegant simplicity. They wouldn't plant a crude bomb under the driver's seat or in the trunk. Such devices, even expertly made, could leave a forensic signature. Fragments of a specific detonator, chemical residue from a particular batch of explosives, a blast pattern that screamed assassination to any competent investigator. No, this had to be different. Cleaner. The director wanted the ghost's end to be a mystery, a cautionary tale whispered among his followers. He got careless. He had a mechanical failure. It was God's will. The weapon was the car itself. Specifically, the 80 liters of high-octane gasoline sloshing in its fuel tank. An internal combustion engine is a series of controlled explosions, 1,000 tiny bursts of power per minute. All they had to do was make one of those explosions uncontrolled. Catastrophic. Ilara, the mission's chief technical officer, was the architect of this particular demise. A quiet, intense woman with degrees in chemical engineering and microelectronics from Technion. She had designed the delivery system in the hushed, climate-controlled labs of their Glylo compound. She called it the Ignis, Latin for fire. It wasn't a bomb in the traditional sense. It was a catalyst. The device was no bigger than a thumb drive, yet it contained a small, precisely shaped charge of RDX designed to create a self-forging projectile of molten copper and a capacitor bank capable of discharging a massive, instantaneous electrical pulse. The entire unit was ingeniously built into a perfect replica of the Mercedes OEM fuel pump assembly, indistinguishable from the factory original down to the Bosch part numbers stamped on its casing. When triggered, the Ignis would perform 2 functions in a span of milliseconds. The shaped charge would detonate inward, rupturing the fuel tank from the inside and simultaneously aerosolizing the 80 liters of gasoline into a perfect, fuel-rich vapor cloud under the car. A heartbeat later, the capacitor would discharge its stored energy, creating a high-temperature plasma arc that would ignite the cloud. The result wouldn't be a simple explosion, it would be a fuel-air detonation, a thermobaric event. The car would be vaporized from the chassis out, the ensuing fireball reaching over 2,500 degrees Celsius, consuming every trace of the device, the occupant, and any evidence of foul play. The final report from the Portuguese authorities would read, "Catastrophic mechanical failure leading to fuel tank rupture and ignition." A tragic, mundane accident. But to achieve this elegant, untraceable kill, they had to perform a feat of breathtaking audacity. They had to get inside the fuel tank of a paranoid terrorist's car, parked in a secure underground garage, and swap out a factory part for a weaponized one, leaving no fingerprints, no scratches, no trace whatsoever. It was a surgeon's task, to be performed in the heart of a minefield. The man for that job was Gavriel, a former Chayatet 13 naval commando. Gavriel moved with a liquid silence that was unnerving even to his own teammates. He was a man who seemed more at home in the crushing blackness of the deep sea than on dry land. For the past week, he had lived in a rented garage on the industrial outskirts of Lisbon with an identical silver Mercedes, purchased for cash from a used car dealer in Porto. He had practiced the swap over and over, timed by Alara with a digital stopwatch, her critiques delivered in quiet, precise tones. He stripped and reassembled the fuel system until his fingers, thick and calloused from a life of hard use, could perform the delicate task by feel alone in total darkness. His record was 4 minutes and 12 seconds. From popping the rear seat cushion to accessing the panel, disconnecting the fuel lines, swapping the pump assembly, and sealing it all back up, factory perfect. The trigger was Ari's responsibility. The Ignis was not connected to a simple radio detonator that could be jammed or traced. It was slaved to a sophisticated command and control module that communicated over their proprietary, triple encrypted network, a stream of data cleverly masquerading as a regional weather service broadcast. To arm the device, 3 conditions had to be met. First, Maya's surveillance team had to confirm visual identification of the target alone in the vehicle. Second, the car's GPS, constantly monitored by a tiny, parasitic magnetic tracker Gavriel had attached to the chassis a week ago, had to enter a pre-designated kill box, a specific stretch of road with minimal pedestrian traffic and clear satellite visibility. Third, Ari, from his overwatch position, had to give his biometric authorization, a fingerprint scan on a ruggedized military tablet resting on the passenger seat beside him. Only then would the fire command be sent to the director in Tel Aviv for the final, irrevocable authorization. A quadruple redundant system designed to prevent mistakes. Because in their world, a mistake wasn't a sternly worded memo from human resources. It was an international incident or a dead civilian on the 6 o'clock news. The silver Mercedes emerged from the subterranean gloom of the garage, its metallic paint catching the afternoon sun. Ari's heart hammered against his ribs, a steady, familiar drumbeat he had come to know as the overture to violence. "Target is mobile," he murmured into the microphone stitched into his shirt collar. "Heading west on Avenida Infante Dom Henrique." "Confirmed," Maya replied from her command post. A Mercedes-Benz Sprinter disguised as a Canalizações e Esgotos Lisboa plumbing van, parked near the waterfront. Inside, she was surrounded by a bank of glowing monitors, their cold light reflecting in her glasses. It was a high-tech nerve center hidden within a shell of absolute mundanity, smelling of solder and industrial-strength air freshener. "We have him. Kestrel 2 is overhead. He's alone." A micro-drone, a marvel of miniaturization disguised as a common European Kestrel, circled lazily at 2,000 feet. Its optics were so powerful it could read the date on a coin from that altitude. Its thermal imaging capable of seeing the heat signature of the car's engine, against the cooler asphalt. Its feed was being streamed in real time to Maya's van and to the tablet on Ari's lap. He glanced down, seeing the world from the Kestrel's point of view. The silver car, a tiny, gleaming beetle crawling through the city's complex arteries, a data tag hovering over it, pulsing gently. The ghost was a creature of habit, a vulnerability his paranoia couldn't erase. 3 times a week, he drove to a secluded cove 20 kilometers up the coast. He would park, walk along the windswept beach for exactly 1 hour, then return. It was his thinking spot, his sanctuary. The designated kill box was a 2-kilometer stretch of the marginal, the coastal highway, just before the turnoff to the cove. It was a beautiful, dramatic road, with the gray, churning Atlantic on one side and a steep, rocky cliff on the other. It was perfect. The mission to install the Ignis had been the fulcrum upon which the entire operation rested. It had happened 2 nights before, during a window of opportunity that was terrifyingly, impossibly brief. Al-Hamza, in a rare deviation from his routine, had gone to a late-night showing at a small art house cinema, an old American noir film. He was in the theater for 117 minutes. Gavriel, dressed in the blue overalls of a municipal maintenance worker, had entered the underground garage through a service duct he'd scouted days earlier. The garage's security was decent, a network of CCTV cameras and a keycard entry system. But Ilara's team had compromised the system from half a world away. They looped the camera feed covering the target's parking space with a clean, static image from the previous night. For the duration of the swap, anyone watching the security monitors would see an empty, silent parking bay. Ilara had also cloned the master keycard, capturing the signal with a discrete device when a security guard had passed by her van a week earlier. The real danger was the unexpected. A resident returning late from a party. A security guard deciding to do a physical patrol off schedule. Gavriel had 4 minutes and 12 seconds of practiced perfection to achieve. He had maybe 5 minutes of a real-world buffer. Ari had been his close support, parked in the same Fiat Panda in the street outside, monitoring police and municipal frequencies, his hand resting on the cool, textured polymer grip of his Glock 19. It was a Generation 4 model, with a custom trigger job that reduced the pull to a crisp 3 pounds, and loaded with federal HST 124 grain jacketed hollow points, designed for maximum expansion and minimal overpenetration. It was a surgeon's tool, and he was a surgeon of a different sort. He had listened to the silence on the comms, a silence punctuated only by the sound of Gavriel's impossibly controlled breathing and the faint, metallic clicks of his tools as they echoed in the concrete tomb of the garage. Each second had stretched into an eternity. At 2 minutes and 30 seconds, a problem. The retaining ring is cross-threaded. Gavriel's voice came over the comms, a tense, controlled whisper that was far more alarming than a shout. Factory defect. It won't seat. The large plastic ring held the fuel pump assembly in place, creating the airtight seal. Without a perfect seal, the smell of high-octane gasoline would slowly leak into the cabin. Al-Hamza, a man intimately familiar with chemical smells, would notice it instantly. The mission would be blown, and Gavriel would be trapped. "Status?" Ari had demanded, his own voice low and steady, belying the ice water flooding his veins. "Working it," Gavriel replied. There was a pause, a moment of dead air that felt like an hour. Then the sound of a soft, precise tap of metal on plastic. "I'm retapping the thread." Gently. Ari's blood ran cold. Field stripping a weapon in the dark under fire was one thing. Performing delicate, Improvised mechanical repairs on a live, weaponized device inside a terrorist's car in a hostile environment was another level of insanity entirely. The silence stretched. 30 seconds. A minute. The digital clock on the Fiat's dashboard seemed to mock him, its green digits ticking away their margin of safety. "It's in," Gabriel finally breathed, a soft exhalation of pure relief. "Seal is good. Closing up." He was out of the garage with 20 seconds to spare, melting into the Lisbon night just as the final credits rolled on the noir film. He left nothing behind but a ghost of himself and a ticking clock, submerged in a tank of gasoline. Now, 2 days later, that clock was nearing midnight. The Mercedes flowed with the traffic, a silver fish in a metallic river. Ari followed, a shadow among shadows. He wasn't just watching the target vehicle. He was watching the world around it. The blue delivery truck 2 cars ahead. The young couple on a red Vespa weaving recklessly through lanes. The lumbering tourist bus in the right lane, its occupants snapping photos. Each was a potential complication, a random variable in a deadly, meticulously crafted equation. "He's approaching the marginal." Maya's voice cut through his concentration. 5 kilometers to the box. On Ari's tablet, a translucent green rectangle materialized on the satellite map, overlaying the designated stretch of highway. The car's GPS icon, a small silver dot, crept inexorably towards it. "All stations. Final check-in," Ari commanded, his tone all business. "Surveillance is green," Maya responded instantly. "Visual confirmed. No escort, no tail. Kestrel 2 reports clear skies." "Gabriel, status?" "Exfil team is staged and ready. We are green." Gabriel's voice was calm. He and the extraction vehicle were positioned miles away, ready to spirit the team to a private airfield the moment the job was done. "Alara?" "Ignis is online. System is stable. Capacitor is fully charged. All diagnostics are green." Alara's voice was as steady and precise as the microcircuitry she designed. Ari took a slow, deep breath, the stale air of the car filling his lungs. "Tel Aviv. Lisbon is green across the board. Standing by for engagement." A new voice entered his earpiece, crisp and authoritative, digitally scrubbed of any accent but filled with the immense weight of command. It was the director. "Acknowledged, Lisbon. The box is yours. You have the final authorization. Make it clean." The final authorization. The director trusted his man on the ground. The final decision to press the button rested with Ari. It was a burden and a privilege. He thought of Yossi in his wheelchair, his phantom legs still aching with the memory of the shrapnel that had torn it apart in Vienna. This wasn't just state policy. This was personal. The Mercedes swept onto the coastal highway. The afternoon sun glinted off the vast, steel-gray expanse of the ocean. It was a postcard view. Tourists were parked at scenic overlooks, aiming their cameras at the dramatic coastline. A family was having a picnic on a patch of grass near the road, their 2 children chasing a bright red ball perilously close to the shoulder. Ari's stomach tightened into a cold knot. "Too much civilian activity," Ari said, his voice sharp. "The primary box is no-go. I repeat, abort the primary box." "Agreed," Maya said without hesitation. "He'll pass through the primary in 90 seconds. There's a secondary box 3 kilometers further down. It's a causeway section, more isolated, less scenic." "Route him there," Ari ordered. This was Alara's magic again. The team had a subtle, powerful way of influencing the target's route. A device they called the traffic warden. It was a small, powerful radio transmitter in Maya's van, that could mimic the signals used to control the city's smart traffic light network. From her keyboard, Alara could turn a light green a few seconds early or hold a red a few seconds longer, gently nudging the target's car onto their preferred path without him ever suspecting he was anything but lucky. "Warden is active," Alara reported coolly, nudging him off the main route at the next interchange. "He'll think he's avoiding tourist traffic." Ari watched on his tablet as the Mercedes turn signal blinked. The car moved smoothly into the right lane, following a new green light at a small roundabout that had just miraculously appeared. He was being herded, a silver sheep guided with invisible hands, towards the abattoir. The secondary kill box was a long, straight causeway, with a sheer rock face on one side and a low concrete seawall on the other. No scenic turnouts, no picnic spots, just asphalt, rock, and water. "Perfect. He's on the causeway," Maya announced, her voice flat, all emotion stripped away. "Entering the box in 10 seconds. The road ahead is clear for at least a kilometer. The box is clean." The green rectangle on Ari's tablet began to flash, a pulsing indicator of imminent action. The car's silver icon drifted into its center. "Target is in the box," Ari stated, his voice a dispassionate monotone. He placed his right thumb on the tablet's screen. A small circle appeared under it, the glass cool against his skin as it scanned the unique whorls of his print. Biometric ID confirmed. Target in designated zone. Visual confirmed. Single occupant. Awaiting final command. The words glowed in stark white letters against the dark interface. The world seemed to slow down, sounds becoming distant and muffled. He could see the Mercedes on the road ahead, a distant silver glint against the gray asphalt. He saw the drone's eye view on his tablet, a clinical, top-down perspective of the impending event. In that car was a man who had murdered 47 innocent people in Vienna, including 2 children who had been getting ice cream with their parents. A man who was, at that very moment, likely refining the details of his next atrocity. Ari's job was to stop that, to be the final, definitive period at the end of a bloody sentence. But he also saw a car, a simple car driving on a sunny afternoon. A flicker of doubt, as cold and sharp as a shard of glass, pierced his professional resolve. Was this justice? Or was it just a more technologically sophisticated form of the same brutality Al-Hamza practiced? He thought of Yossi again. He remembered visiting him in the Hadassah hospital, the pervasive smell of antiseptic, the sight of his mentor, a giant of a man, a legend in the Mossad, weeping silently, not from the physical pain, but from the searing rage of his own helplessness. The doubt vanished, burned away by the white-hot memory. This wasn't brutality. This was a surgeon excising a cancer. His thumb hovered over the final confirmation icon on the screen. A large virtual red button labeled Execute. "Lisbon, send it," the director's voice commanded from 3,000 miles away, a voice from the heavens anointing the act. Ari pressed his thumb firmly to the screen. For a single, heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. The silver car continued down the causeway, serene and untouched. Ari's heart seized. Had it failed? Had the signal been blocked by a solar flare or some unforeseen interference? Then, the world erupted. It wasn't the sharp, percussive crack of a conventional bomb. It was a deep, guttural whump that seemed to suck the very air out of the sky. A brilliant, utterly silent blossom of orange and white light engulfed the Mercedes. The silence lasted only a fraction of a second before the sound wave hit. A physical punch that rattled the Fiat's cheap windows and vibrated through the marrow of Ari's bones. The fireball climbed, a furious, roiling cloud of incandescent fuel, turning from orange to a greasy black smoke that stained the clear sky. The car was simply gone. It had not been blown apart. It had been unmade, its atoms violently rearranged by the thermobaric pressure wave. Pieces of burning metal, none larger than a man's hand, rained down onto the asphalt and hissed into the sea. A blackened chassis, twisted into a grotesque sculpture of modern art, was all that remained on the road, engulfed in secondary flames from the melting asphalt. The operation had lasted 6 weeks. The climax had lasted less than 2 seconds. "Target eliminated," Ari said into his comms. His voice was perfectly steady, but he noticed his hand was trembling slightly. "Damocles is complete. All stations, execute exfiltration protocol. Go dark in 5. He didn't wait for a reply. He put the Fiat in gear and drove away, merging smoothly back into the traffic, heading towards the city. He did not look in the rearview mirror at the pillar of black smoke rising into the perfect blue Portuguese sky. 2 weeks later, Ari sat on the balcony of a quiet Tel Aviv apartment overlooking the Mediterranean. The late morning sun was warm on his face. The coffee in his hand was strong and spiced with cardamom. The Lisbon job was already a ghost, a half-remembered dream filed away in the archives of his mind. The world's media had reported on the tragic accident in Portugal. A faulty fuel line, the experts speculated. A terrible, unlucky spark from a catalytic converter. Fadi al-Hamza's name was never mentioned. He had simply ceased to exist, an erasure so complete it was as if he had never been born. His network, deprived of its architect, was already beginning to fracture, its lieutenants turning on one another in a paranoid frenzy. The new attack he had been planning had died with him on that sunny causeway. It was a clean win, a textbook operation. The glass door to the balcony slid open. Yossi rolled his wheelchair out, a tall glass of lemonade sweating in his hand. He had aged 10 years since the bombing. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his hair grayer, but the fire within those eyes, the fierce intelligence, was undimmed. "I read the after-action report," Yossi said, his voice a low rumble. He maneuvered the chair next to Ari's table. "Clean, very clean. Alara's little toy worked as advertised." "It did," Ari said, his gaze fixed on a container ship on the horizon, a slow-moving giant on a placid sea. "You should be proud, Ari. You took a monster off the board. You saved lives. Many of them." "I know. But something was wrong." Ari had felt it ever since he'd returned. A loose thread. An itch in the back of his mind he couldn't scratch. The intelligence that had pinpointed al-Hamza's location had been too perfect, too timely. The ghost had been untouchable for 18 months, a phantom flitting through the shadows, and then, suddenly, they had an encrypted message, a location, a full pattern of life, all but gift-wrapped for them. Mossad was good, the best in the world, but this had been too easy. It felt less like a hunt and more like a guided tour. Yossi took a long sip of his lemonade, his eyes following Ari's out to sea. "The source of the initial tip," he said, as if plucking the thought directly from Ari's head. "The one that put us onto al-Hamza in Lisbon. It's been bothering you, hasn't it?" Ari finally turned to look at him. "It was too clean, Yossi. It fell into our laps like a piece of ripe fruit. We're not that lucky. Nobody is." Yossi nodded slowly, a sad, knowing look on his face. He reached into a canvas pocket on the side of his wheelchair and pulled out a thin manila file. He slid it across the small glass table to Ari. "The director didn't want you to see this. He believes in the simple narrative, good versus evil, us versus them. It's cleaner that way. But the world, as you and I know, is rarely that simple." Ari opened the file. It contained a single sheet of paper, a signals intelligence transcript. It was the original intercept from the Negev station, the digital whisper that had started Operation Damocles. But this was the raw, unredacted version. The message hadn't been a boast from Al-Hamza to a new cell. The metadata, scrubbed from the version Ari and the team had seen in their briefing, told a different, more chilling story. The message had been sent from an IP address in Tehran, routed through a proxy in Moscow to a dead-drop server in Germany, where it was deliberately left in a sector known to be monitored by Western intelligence. It was a piece of cheese left in a trap, designed to be intercepted. The message contained exquisite details of Al-Hamza's location, his routines, his paranoia, all cleverly disguised as a communication between fellow operatives. It was a betrayal, cold and calculated. "Who sent it?" Ari asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The sender was positively identified 2 days ago," Yossi said grimly. "A rising star in Iran's Quds force, a man named Zaid al-Fassi. He's Al-Hamza's chief rival. They came up together in the Bekaa Valley, but Zaid is more ambitious, more ruthless. He saw Al-Hamza as old news, a relic from a previous generation, a master of explosives in an age of ones and zeros. Zaid wants to take the organization in a new, more terrifying direction. Cyber warfare, biological agents, things Fadi only dreamed of. But he couldn't challenge the ghost directly. The old guard was too loyal. So he found a weapon powerful and precise enough to do the job for him, and pointed it at his rival. Ari felt a cold dread spread through his chest, chilling him despite the warm sun. "Us," he said, the single word tasting like ash. "We were the weapon." "Zaid knew we'd take the bait," Yossi continued, his voice heavy with the weight of a lifetime of such grim compromises. "He knew our history with Al-Hamza, knew we would spare no expense to see him gone. He served up his rival on a silver platter, and we obliged with our most advanced technology and our best people. We took out the old king, clearing the way for a younger, more vicious prince to seize the throne." Ari stared at the transcript, at the lines of code and routing data that had led him to a causeway in Lisbon. He hadn't been a hunter. He had been a tool, a puppet, his strings pulled by an enemy he didn't even know he had. He had executed one monster, only to crown another. The clean, simple narrative of good versus evil had dissolved into a murky, ethical swamp where enemies used you to kill other enemies, and victory was indistinguishable from defeat. He looked up from the file, out at the calm, blue Mediterranean. It looked just like the water off the coast of Lisbon. Peaceful. Deceptive. He had pulled the trigger. He had excised the cancer. But the disease, he now realized with sickening clarity, was far more widespread than he had ever imagined. And in his quest to destroy a monster, he had merely helped create a new one, stronger, more cunning, and now indebted to no one.